Hello and welcome to Quartzlight, your car brochure channel, and in today's episode, the Peugeot 504 Saloon. Hello and welcome back, and if you're new to Quartzlight, we're a car brochure channel here on YouTube, looking at car brochures from around the world for the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, and sometimes beyond that as well. So if you're interested in cars and car knowledge and of course car brochures, please consider subscribing. Anyway, back to today's episode. Yes, it is the wonderful Peugeot 504 Saloon. So let's have a look at that now. And here is today's brochure, the Peugeot 504. And indeed this is for the right-hand drive market. It says there, the Saloon right-hand drive. And there are a few little differences with the right-hand drive model actually. Now the brochure itself is quite an early one. We're thinking July 1970, the little date code on there. The Peugeot 504 was quite incredible actually. It ran for one generation from 68 all the way to 1983. One generation. Imagine that happening today. We just can't really imagine it happening, can you? It's quite incredible, but it was a really great car actually. It won 1969 European Car of the Year, and it then became known for having a very robust body, long suspension travel, high ground clearance, which made it perfect for like African countries and indeed, rough terrain countries. You're thinking Australia, Brazil, Argentina, and then of course places like Nigeria and Kenya, where it seemed to last forever. Quite an amazing car. There was of course the estate version as well, and as you can see on this estate version or wagon version, depending where you're from, extremely practical cars, the estates. And interestingly, there was actually styled in a different place. So we're thinking the Peugeot 504 Saloon is a Pininfarina design, whereas the estate was more like an in-house Peugeot affair. Now, although I do love the 504 and they were big cars really for Europe at the time, extremely practical, I must admit I do prefer the rear end of the Saloon and that Pininfarina design. But then again, I've always quite liked Pininfarina as a style house. Incidentally, the estate, we've actually already looked at this brochure earlier on, and I'll try, if I remember, to put a bit of a link at the end of this episode, because this is really for the Saloon. And then when we zoom in on the image, it's just kind of the little images, little touches that make it a fascinating car really. And I always find with a lot of these cars, the earlier examples, kind of like the purer design or the nicest looking, them lovely big chrome bumpers on there, and then overriders, and then if you just notice on the grille there, the golden Peugeot emblem and a little badge that would be just on the bonnet there saying 504. Very simple wheels, but they look really nice with them chrome caps on there. And then you can notice this quite unusual treatment underneath the doors there. Makes it look a very stylish car. And then, like I say, I do particularly like the rear end now. It's like slopes away. I think it looks very stylish on this car. So this particular brochure, like I say, 1970. So a pretty good condition, considering actually this isn't really a brochure. It's kind of like just more like a sheet really. So amazing it survived so well in all those years. And you think about buying one of these in Britain in 1970, you must have been a little bit different to be considering this, because Britain in the early 70s wasn't really adopting, so-called foreign cars too well at the time. There was a little bit of fear about, maintenance costs and insurance costs. So most people certainly bought British back then, even though these were probably better cars than anything that was being built in Britain at the time. But certainly you were someone a bit different if you actually bought one of these cars in 1970. And like I say, this is specifically for the right-hand drive market. Anyway, let's have a look on the other side. So like I say, yes, not really a brochure, more like just a two-sided sheet, but it's got some interesting information, and that's why I wanted to include it today. Certainly on this page, it's kind of like giving you a nice look at the interior and indeed talking about what you got. And 1970 was interesting for the 504 because the engines kind of like changed a little bit. You can actually get this time not only a carbureted model, but also a fuel-injected model. Think about that in 1970. Anyway, let's start by looking at that lovely interior. Zooming on the interior, and yes, it's showing a right-hand drive version, but what a stylish looking interior it is. No signs of any fake wood, and I think I approve of that. I think this looks a lot more stylish than the 70s wood they kind of like threw on there in the early 70s and through the 70s. Remember, this is a car that came out in 68. I think this looks very modern for the times, actually. Also note, if we just move down the screen, the floor mounted gear change. Yes, that was a right hand drive thing. Left hand drive's got a column change, but we'll learn about that in a moment. Now if you look at the left hand drive version, you can clearly see that column change. Yeah, the gauges are a little bit different for a number of reasons. This is a very base model, and this brochure is actually from 76, but this is like a very base model. In fact, if you look at a higher spec model, now if you look at a slightly higher spec model, a GL model, you can see those gauges are the same, although, you know, steering wheel's different, but again, this brochure is from much later. But you can still make out the, oops, if I get my pen or pointer in the right place, you can still just about make out that column change on this left-hand drive model. Okay, moving over to the text. So 504 saloon right-hand drive, tells it's a 405 seater and 4-door with a 1971cc 4-cylinder engine. Two different engine choices, which we'll note in a moment, both carburetor and fuel injection, but this carburetor one first. It's telling it's a 98 bhp, 5600 rpm. Carburetor engine, as we said, speed 100 miles per hour. Second choice is 110 bhp at 5600 rpm, indirect petrol injection engine, speed 107 miles per hour. Feeling that, 107 miles per hour. Late 60s, early 70s, pretty quick for what is, after all, just a 4-door saloon. If we move down a little bit further, it's got an automatic disengageable fan. Automatic transmission is an option as well, independent 4-wheel suspension, trailing arms at rear, anti-roll bars front and rear, servo assisted disc brakes on all 4 wheels with brake load compensator, rack and pinion steering, safety column made in 2 parts with universal joint. So again, remind you, this came out in 68. It seems very, very advanced when you compare it to the British made cars or even other European cars. If we move down further, it tells you a bit more about the right-hand drive versions. It tells us floor gear changes standard on all right-hand drive 504 saloons. Otherwise, the specification is similar to left-hand drive versions, except for the manual screen washer control and instruments, which are generally graduated in miles, which, you know, makes sense. At the bottom here, it quite simply says Peugeot. A little bit of small print at the end here, printed in France, of course, but if we move right to the end there, 770, that's going to be telling us that's July 1970. So there we go, that lovely Peugeot 504, one of my favourite cars. I really like these. I always felt it was a little bit ahead of the time, but also a really strong, well-made car. Love both the saloons and the estates. I do like the end, just the back end of the saloons, but I love the estates as well. And there was also some very beautiful coupe versions and even a cabriolet. And from the other end of the scale, there's even a pickup truck. I even love those as well. Really well made cars, but also with that Pininfarina design on the saloons. An attractive car. Even the coupe is very beautiful. Thank you so much for watching today. If you remember these cars, please jot it in the comments and I'll try and do that link to the estates at the end of this programme. So all we've got to say is please do subscribe if you've not done already, and thank you so much for every single one of you who has subscribed. I'm very grateful. But for now we'll say take care and goodbye.